You might have never heard of the Anakim, a mysterious group mentioned in the Holy Scriptures. A bloodline of giants who, thousands of years ago, walked the lands of Canaan and Mesopotamia. Ancient writers and historians describe them as one of the most legendary peoples of the ancient Near East, surrounded by stories of great strength, towering height, and a possible connection to beings from the heavens. In this video, we will uncover who the Anakim were, where they came from, the stories told about them, and the hidden truths that have survived throughout history. Get ready to explore one of the most fascinating chapters of the ancient world. The name Anak appears multiple times in the Old Testament, and in some translations, it is written as Enoch, though the most original and accurate form is Anak. In Phoenician and early Hebrew, the word Anak means necklace or ornament for the neck, a symbol of honor, status, or heritage. But the meaning goes even deeper. The term did not begin in Hebrew or Phoenician. It echoes from a much older language. In Sumerian, the language of the earliest civilizations in Mesopotamia, Anak lines up with the word Anaki, which literally means the descendants from above, or those who came from heaven. This word traveled across ages, from Sumerian to Akkadian, the language spoken in Ur of the Chaldees, the birthplace of Abraham, and later into ancient Aramaic, the language of the Israelites, before finally becoming part of Phoenician Hebrew. Phoenician was a northwest Semitic language spoken by a seafaring and trading people who lived along the Levant coast, modern Lebanon, parts of Syria, and Israel. They created one of the world's oldest and most influential alphabets, the ancestor of the Greek alphabet, and later the Latin alphabet we use today. Their writing system had 22 consonants and no written vowels, similar to early Hebrew, and it preserved the records of an advanced civilization. In its earliest form, in both Sumerian and Akkadian, Anak can be translated as the sons of those who fell from heaven. That is why the scriptures refer to them as the sons of Anak, carrying the same meaning. Descendants of those who descended from the heavens, beings whose origins seem to go beyond the normal human realm. During the Israelite conquest of Canaan, one of the most dramatic and mysterious periods in the Old Testament, the name Anak appears as the forefather of a tribe that seemed to come from an age long before ordinary men. The Anakim, the children of Anak, were known for their enormous height, their almost superhuman power, and a presence that, according to ancient descriptions, looked far from ordinary. People said their eyes shone like starlight, and their voices, when they roared through the valleys of Canaan, made the earth vibrate beneath their feet. These giants, according to sacred writings, were a fading reminder of a distant era when the divine and the human still crossed paths. It was an age before the Great Flood, a time when heavenly beings called the Watchers in ancient traditions came down to earth and took human women as wives, producing a mixed race of mighty warriors and colossal beings. This forbidden bloodline was almost entirely destroyed by the cleansing waters of the flood. Yet pieces of it survived, and among those survivors were the sons of Anak. Deuteronomy 2:10 explains that the Anakim were connected to the Rephaim, an even older and more mysterious group described as people of great size and strength. They lived in ancient regions such as Bashan and Ashtaroth, lands later tied to Og, king of Bashan, the last giant mentioned in the scriptures. These beings were so fearsome that ordinary soldiers shook with fear just hearing their name. When Moses sent 12 spies to scout the Promised Land, the reports they brought back were astonishing. 10 of them admitted before the entire people that they had seen humans of impossible height, figures so tall they seemed beyond nature. Some scholars suggest that based on ancient measurements, an Anakite could stand between 13 to 15 feet tall, over 4 meters, wielding spears as thick as tree trunks. Their armor, made of bronze and iron, was so heavy that it would take a whole group of men to lift it. The spies declared, "We saw the descendants of Anak there, who come from the Nephilim." In our own eyes, we were like grasshoppers. Terror seized the Israelites. The idea of confronting beings who looked like fallen gods froze the courage of many. But Caleb and Joshua, driven by a faith greater than human reasoning, refused to give in to fear. They did not claim the giants were unreal. Instead, they insisted that with the God of Israel, even the greatest obstacles could fall. "The Lord is with us. Caleb said. "Do not be afraid of them." That statement became unforgettable, a moment when belief stood face to face with the impossible. From then on, the Anakim symbolized more than powerful foes. To the Hebrews, they came to represent the forces that resist God's plan, the lingering shadows of the ancient heavenly rebellion that still echoed in the world. Throughout Deuteronomy, Joshua, and Judges, the Anakim reappear as the last remnants of an older time, survivors from an age when the earth still carried the marks of the intervention of the sons of God. Their cities were described as being built with enormous stone walls, and their thrones were carved from blocks so massive that even today, archaeologists struggle to understand how such structures were constructed. One of the greatest heroes who stood against these giants was Caleb once again. Many years later, now elderly but still strong, he returned to Hebron, the same land where he had first seen the giants. There he faced the three famous leaders of the Anakim, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai, the sons of Anak. Caleb fought them with the same boldness he had shown in his youth. Tradition says he defeated all three, taking back the very territory that once filled him with fear. That region had long been known for an ancient city called Kiriath Arba, named after Arba, the greatest of the Anakim, a giant whose height, according to old rabbinic writings, was said to exceed the height of 7 men standing one on top of another. After its conquest, the city was renamed Hebron, and it became one of the most sacred places in Israel, a lasting reminder that faith conquered fear, and that the giants who once dominated the land were overcome through God's promise. But the memory of that ancient race did not disappear easily. Old writings, scattered records, and oral traditions preserved by different civilizations, Sumerian, Canaanite, Egyptian, and Hebrew, describe similar beings, enormous men with extraordinary strength, sometimes honored as gods and sometimes dreaded as monsters. Some tales say that when these giants died in battle, the earth shook beneath them, and that their bones were so huge they were placed as markers along early roads. As time passed, modern scholars tried to reinterpret these legends, suggesting the giants were simply symbolic representations of powerful nations or dynasties. However, the original texts written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and ancient Greek preserve unique details hinting at a much darker beginning. In these writings, the terms Nephilim and Rephaim appear in specific contexts that describe beings who were not entirely human, descendants of a union between heavenly beings and earthly women, the offspring of the Watchers who defied God's order. This interpretation gains support from the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered between 1947 and 1956 in the caves of Qumran. These scrolls, dating from 250 BC to 68 AD, are priceless archaeological discoveries. Among them are almost complete copies of the Old Testament, as well as apocryphal and mystical texts that openly describe a time when angels came down to earth and taught humanity forbidden knowledge, such as metalworking, magical practices, and methods of war. One fragment, known as the Book of Giants, found among the Qumran manuscripts, speaks of the hybrid children of the Watchers, beings who consumed everything humans produced, whose corruption angered God and led to the Great Flood. These writings strengthen the belief that the Anakim and the Nephilim were survivors from that ancient era, living reminders of a heavenly rebellion that left its mark on human history. Most of the scrolls were written in Hebrew, others in Aramaic, and some in Greek. Together, they reveal the beliefs of an ancient people who held that heaven and earth had once met, with devastating results. Within the faded lines of these sacred writings lies the memory of hybrid beings, ancient warriors, and legendary kings, the giants of Canaan. Their bones may have disappeared into the earth, but their stories still echo like distant thunder from a time when giants truly walked among humans. Across the oldest texts and traditions preserved by the civilizations of the Near East, a single belief repeatedly appears: the idea that the giants, including the Anakim, were direct descendants of the fallen angels known as the Watchers in ancient lore. These heavenly beings were said to have crossed the boundary between the divine and the human world, taking the daughters of men and producing a hybrid race filled with extraordinary strength, intelligence, and ability, yet marked by corruption and rebellion. These hybrids were described as towering beings whose presence dominated the plains of Canaan, the mountains of Bashan, and the strongholds of early city-states. Stories claimed their skin glowed like polished bronze in the sunlight. Their steps made the ground shake, and their voices rolled like thunder from far away. People of the region viewed them as children of both heaven and earth, part angel, part human, the final survivors of an age when divine beings still walked among mortals. Despite this overwhelming agreement across ancient sources, Hebrew, Jewish, Sumerian, Egyptian, and others, many modern scholars have tried to reinterpret these accounts. They insisted the giants were simply tall warriors or influential tribal leaders whose stories grew into myths over time. But the ancient testimonies etched into stone tablets, clay fragments, and scrolls reveal something different. A narrative filled with awe, danger, and forbidden history. Among the most striking pieces of evidence are the Egyptian execration texts, dating from the Middle Kingdom period, roughly between 2550 BC and 1650 BC. These texts were used in ritual curses, capturing the names of foreign enemies and powerful beings the Egyptians feared and sought to symbolically destroy. The names of foreign enemies and rival kingdoms were carved onto clay figures and jars. These objects were then smashed during rituals to symbolize the defeat of those enemies before the gods. In some of these curse lists, references appear to the ancient peoples of Canaan, and among them, one name stands out, Yanak or Ionak, a term many Egyptologists link to the phrase, people of Anak. This finding is remarkable because it proves that the reputation of the Anakim reached far beyond Canaan. Even the pharaohs of Egypt, hundreds of kilometers to the south, knew about them. The Egyptians feared these tribes, describing them as people of enormous height and unstoppable strength, followers of unfamiliar gods whom the pharaohs sought to curse in order to maintain cosmic order. In some fragments of these texts, the names of 3 leaders of the Anakim appear: Jiram, Abamu, and Ayam, names that have puzzled historians. Some scholars think these may have been ancestors of the biblical chiefs Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai, mentioned in the book of Joshua. Others believe they might have been rulers from the earliest generations of giants, perhaps older relatives of those who later faced the Israelites. Ancient Hebrew traditions say the Anakim lived far longer than ordinary people, sometimes hundreds of years, which would explain how their stories and achievements became monumental legends remembered across many eras. The writer and mythologist Robert Graves, while studying the origins of Mediterranean civilizations, investigated this connection between Eastern and Western traditions. He noted that the term Anak might relate to the Greek word anax, meaning lord, king, or divine ruler, a title often used for giant kings and early gods in ancient Greek culture. This suggests the name Anak may have traveled across cultures and centuries, appearing in multiple languages to refer to the rulers of a titanic era that existed before recorded human history. Graves went even further, proposing that the Anakim could be connected to the Anaktoioi of Greek tradition, divine kings or titans who ruled during the Golden Age, a time when gods and giants lived together on the earth. These ancient rulers were not seen as ordinary humans, but as living representations of the union between the heavenly world and the earthly one, beings whose existence marked the dividing line between the spiritual realm and the human realm. What is most awe-inspiring and unsettling about the traditions concerning the Anakim is the way their size and power are described. Hebrew writings, Ugaritic inscriptions, and apocryphal texts portray them as men standing 4 to 5 meters tall, able to lift stones that hundreds of normal people could not move. Some ancient writings describe swords as long as palm trees, shields heavier than full-grown oxen, and a durability that seemed almost impossible to defeat. It was said that a single blow from an Anakite warrior could break an Israelite's bronze shield in an instant. Even the smallest among them, according to archaeological estimates and scholars like Robert Graves, stood over 3 meters tall. If their bones were ever discovered, they could easily be mistaken for the remains of prehistoric creatures. Their strongholds and fortified cities, such as those in Hebron and Bashan, were constructed with stone blocks so massive that they surpass what we understand about the building methods of their time. Some rabbinic traditions say that when the Israelites approached the Promised Land, they saw the Anakim from a distance, training with huge stones and jumping from hill to hill, as if the earth's weight could not restrain them. Their bodies, according to these accounts, were unlike ordinary humans, heavier, stronger, and marked by a strange glow in their eyes, a fading trace of heavenly light inherited from the Watchers. Across Hebrew scriptures, Greek legends, and Egyptian curse texts, the image of the Anakim remains consistent. Rulers of extraordinary strength, beings of flesh and stone, descendants of a corrupted heavenly bloodline whose memory still lingers in the world today. Their stories preserve the remains of an age when the divine and the human realms clashed violently, leaving behind ruins, legends, and fragments of a forgotten glory. Yet their greatness was not only in their size. Graves wrote that the Anakim possessed enormous power and incredible speed, able to move swiftly and strike with overwhelming force, even while wearing heavy armor and carrying gigantic weapons. Their resilience was also the stuff of legend. According to the author, figures like Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai suffered terrible injuries in battle, wounds that should have killed them, yet they managed to survive. These same names appear in the Bible, in the books of Joshua and Judges, described as warriors who, though defeated, continued to be feared by everyone around them. Outside of the biblical writings, traditions from many cultures also speak of these giants. The Egyptian execration texts, already discussed, contain direct references to the tribe of the Anakim. Traces of their existence also appear in Phoenician and Aramaic texts, which describe titanic beings from the earliest days of humanity. And even in the Quran, where giant nations are mentioned as having been destroyed by divine punishment. These similarities found in Egyptian, Semitic, biblical, and Islamic traditions all seem to point toward the same ancient memory. A race of giant beings, descendants of those who fell from heaven, whose presence left a deep mark on the minds of early civilizations. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, one of the most trusted writers of the 1st century, also wrote extensively about the giants of the ancient world. He described not only the Anakim, but several other towering tribes who had lived on Earth in its earliest ages. With the eye of a historian and the heart of a guardian of Hebrew tradition, Josephus recorded detailed, stunning accounts of these beings. He writes, "For this reason they moved their camp to Hebron, and when they took it, they killed all the inhabitants. Until then, a race of giants still lived there, whose bodies were so large and whose faces were so different from other men that they shocked the eyes and terrified those who heard them." This vivid, almost cinematic portrayal shows how the giants were viewed, not just as very tall people, but as beings whose appearance felt alien, inspiring both fear and amazement, as though they belonged to another order of creation entirely. Josephus also notes that even in his own lifetime, the bones of these giants could still be seen displayed in certain regions. These remains were far larger than any normal human bones, with unusual proportions that strengthened the belief that they weren't simply tall men, but members of a separate, possibly hybrid race, one whose ancestry went back to the forbidden union between divine beings and human women. Over the centuries, the tribe of the Anakim seems to have been wiped out during the wars of conquest, defeated by the Israelites and other nearby nations. Despite their massive size and great power, they eventually fell to human determination and faith. Very few survived, and from those few, legends were born. Some were honored as demigods, others were hired as mighty warriors or mercenaries. And among these remnants rose a name that would echo through history: Goliath, the Philistine giant, brought down by the young David. Most of the others faded into obscurity, hunted, destroyed, or lost to time. Yet their traces remain preserved in the Bible, in ancient historical accounts, in fragments of inscriptions, and in stories passed down across thousands of years. They are the scattered pieces of a memory that refuses to disappear. A reminder that, in a distant age, giants truly walked among human beings. If you want to explore this mystery further, to uncover its origins, its link to the fallen angels, and its traces in biblical, apocryphal, and archaeological records, let me know in the comments. There is still much more to uncover about the giants mentioned in Scripture and the legacy they left behind. May God bless you, and I'll see you soon.